Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Outer Sounds. We're here with Chris from Sahel Sounds, and we're talking about the Les Filles de Il Haddad album at Pioneer Works, which is going to be our July section selection. Um, and we're happy to chat about this album and the Sahel Sounds label. How you doing, Chris?
Pretty good. Thanks
Good,
for having me
man.
on.
Yeah, thanks for having me being here. Um, the I wanted to talk first about Les Filles and then go into the Sahel Sounds label too. But their first record you put out in 2016, right? And how did you come to discover their music and come across what they were doing?
Yeah, so I've been working in Niger for quite some time, and I came across, but I have a big network of people. I'm connected to a lot of musicians. As
Okay.
more people get on the internet, where there's a big sort of a virtual network of people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and so there was a photo making the rounds of Fatu, but it was untitled, and it was just this photo of this Tuareg woman playing a guitar, and I've worked with a lot of Tuareg music over the years, but I very rarely have ever seen a woman a guitarist. It's
Right,
a
right.
pretty male dominated scene.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent some messages to some friends, and incidentally, it was actually one of the musicians I work with. It was his cousin, so he said,
Okay.
"Well, come to Niger. We'll go to the village and visit her." So in 2014, in the fall of 2014, we went to visit Ilarada, and a small village out in the central part of Niger. It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
remote. I mean, you get to the capital of Niger, which is already a pretty long route to get to, and then it's a
Mm-hmm.
10-hour bus ride to a city, and then a 2-hour drive through the dirt roads
Wow.
to
Yeah.
get to the village. And then Fatu was another 30 minutes by motorcycle, to get to actually
Mm-hmm.
her camp, which was pretty far out.
Yeah.
And yeah, we spent a few days there in the village doing these recordings, sort of just sitting around playing the acoustic guitar and these field recordings, and then some of the performances that happened at night, which were these percussion, uh,
Yeah.
sort of choral music, and that was the first album that material formed the
Right.
first album we released,
Yeah.
the self-titled album. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the thing, of that first album, the A side is like the acoustic guitar and voice, and then the B side is that long, like sidelong piece of like
Yeah.
percussion and vocals, which it makes a really nice, I think, a really nice pairing for sure. And then, when their second album comes along, we hear electric guitar for the first time. So how are they sort of like progressing? Was it a matter of, after the first album, like actually going into a studio instead of doing field recordings, or how did that work?
Well, interesting. The first studio album we did was right at the beginning of their first ever tour. So
Okay.
shortly after we released this album, we got invitations to play in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and the band had never really performed as a cohesive band before. It was just something they kind of played around with the guitar and performed in the village, but it
Right.
wasn't really a gigging band, right?
Yeah, totally.
They didn't have the possibility to do that. So they really worked on in the village. They got together and they really worked on creating sort of a repertoire, combining that traditional percussion, that 10-day music,
Mm-hmm.
with the guitar, with electric guitar, to kind of come up with a dynamic set,
Yeah.
that they could perform. And that first album was recorded in maybe a weekend to traveling to Europe. So it was just on their first tour. Uh, it's sort of a little rough around the edges, but I think that's what made it really beautiful. It was just them getting into the studio for the first time ever,
Yeah.
and really doing the recording for the first time as a band. So
Oh, so that was separate from the recordings that you made when you first met them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. And so then they the album that we're featuring for Outer Sounds is a live recording from Pioneer Works, and I know that they did a US tour, a few years ago, and
Sure.
I have a funny story about that. They played here in Burlington, Vermont, and I couldn't go because the same night I had tickets already to see Stereo Lab in Montreal, so I had to pick between the two. It was like one of the few times where there was like two really good shows going on, and I was like, oh my god, I couldn't go see
Sure.
them. Super bummed about that. Um, tell me about them. That was the first time for them coming to the US, right?
Yeah, yeah. Since they first started touring, and I think the first tour was in 2017. The band has really been touring sort of nonstop. They
Yeah.
toured for a lot in Europe, and then we eventually did this tour in 2019 in the US, which was a kind of grueling tour, just all over the place.
Yeah.
But a really fun tour. It was great to be on the road with the band, and one thing that we really wanted to capture with this record is that we didn't really have any recording of them that shows them in that full sound that they've really developed from the tour. I mean, the first studio album we had was recorded a week into their first ever tour, and since then they've been touring yearly,
Right.
and so this Live at Pioneer Works album, it was really this opportunity to highlight, what do they sound like now? Because it's very different from that first studio album. They've
totally.
developed a really cohesive, dynamic sound, and they're also a band, I think, that, like a lot of the bands like a lot of bands in general, you get a different feeling when they're performing live.
Yeah.
And I would even go so far as to say, in particular with a lot of the bands in West Africa, that performative is such a part of their music. It's whether you're playing at a wedding or a celebration. There's not a lot of I'm going to go in my home studio and mess around. Like, that's not really a thing. It's usually performing, whether it's even a public thing, it's playing with friends. It's these sort of like collaborative jam sessions. So to really capture something with that dynamic give and take of the audience, that was something we really wanted to highlight on this record. And we had this great 2 nighs of performances at Pioneer Works in Red Hook, and so we pulled together this record from those 2 nights.
Yeah, it's a fantastic recording. I really like it a lot. And like you said, it sounds, you're capturing them at a point where, they're really like, it sounds like they're super kind of dialed in and cohesive, and like you can tell that they've been like playing a lot and playing this material a lot. It's super strong. So yeah, I dig that. So have they become like, I would say maybe like the most well-known like release on your label, or I mean, maybe other than Mdu Mokhtar or something like that, but
oh yeah. They're definitely one of the more visible artists, I think, on the label now. Yeah. And I think that what they're doing is they're creating something that's really interesting and new in Tuareg music, or really in West African music. Because not to take you to Paris, but if you look at this Tuareg guitar music, it is such a male-dominated scene. But the roots of all the Tuareg guitar music is from Tinde. It's from this percussive, female-led music that's from the village, and so they've sort of reclaimed that form, but also integrated these traditional elements into it, which end up kind of blending so seamlessly. You know, this isn't some, you know, this isn't a forced thing. This was just it just unfolded really natural when they said we're going to start adding Tende into the guitar. I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's it's really cool to tap into this this richness of instruments, but also of repertoire. I mean, the vocal repertoire of like the songs that they're singing are, you know, ancient songs from that have been sort of traded around through the nomad camps, and these aren't songs that are usually tapped into and used by a lot of guitar bands. You know?
Right. How do the are like the more traditional Tuareg players, they like embracing this, or is it kind of like, you know, tough because it's sort of like, you know, it's like you said, it's such a male dominated, you know, music or whatever?
Oh no, back home, I mean, people
Are excited about it.
Yeah,
that's cool.
It's because it's really it's not too much of a deviation from like what of like the roots. It's more of like almost a folk revival thing,
Right.
you could almost say. You know? And you know, it's inspiring to see what they could inspire back home. You know, because I think they're a band that's gonna open a lot of doors for a lot of musicians who wouldn't pick up the guitar and who wouldn't perform. You know.
Yeah, inspiring like other women back in their country or their hometowns. That's pretty amazing. So well, cool. I want to, you know, touch on your label, Sahel Sounds, too. And so you started Sahel like in 2010 or somewhere around in there with the first
as a label. I was running a blog for I think 2 years.
Okay.
You know, the era when music blogs were definitely a thing.
Yeah, it was a hot time for that. So how did Sahel Sounds start? And I mean, it sounds like maybe you started with some blog, with your blog, and then that maybe moved into a label.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely just started with me wanting to explore music in West Africa and in the Sahara and the Sahel, and I just bought a ticket over there, started traveling around with a field recorder and musicians and recording, and sort of had like an open-ended ticket. I didn't know when I was coming home, so I spent a couple years over there, and I'd record musicians, and whatever I recorded, I'd go to a cyber cafe and upload an MP3 and write a few thoughts about it, and that's kind of what it was. It was just an opportunity to, you know, hear this music live and kind of dip my toe into it, and you know, over the years I started to accumulate archive of recordings. And when I was back in Portland, I crossed paths with Mississippi Records, and started working with them at the outset around 2010 to release some of the music on vinyl, and then it's kind of just progressed over the years. I mean, we've expanded into other aspects as well, with touring and artist management. We've made some films. I think that it's challenging because we're working with artists in a part of the world that don't have a lot of access to the same things that artists in the West have access to. So we have to be kind of a more amorphous label and do a lot of things that your traditional label wouldn't do, like booking tours and getting visas and just learn and just doing all kinds of stuff, because in order to really make it happen, we just have to be really kind of dynamic and fit in wherever we can, you know. But I think there's such a richness of music, and we've just sort of, like, the label, like Sahel Sounds, we've only scratched the surface of what's actually out there. And I really want the label to be more of a an invitation for other people to do their own digging, you know, or whether that's through YouTube and Facebook, or whether it's getting on a plane, you know, going to Bamako, you know. It's it's sort of opportunity to say this stuff is happening. You should take a look.
Yeah, check it out. Yeah. What attracted you like originally to music from that region or that area?
I mean, at the outset, I think it's a lot of the guitar music.
Yeah.
The guitar music from the Sahara and the Sahel has this. There's a lot of pentatonic sort of, blues guitar. It really resonates. It really you can feel something that sounds familiar if you are steeped in like American folk guitar. But the technique and the polyrhythms that are happening during this finger picking and the syncopated rhythms, there's something about it that I didn't understand and I couldn't put my finger on. And I was a guitar player too, and I said, like, I want to know what's happening here. How's that one person doing all this on one guitar? Yeah. It sounds like there's 5 guitars being overdubbed here.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of curiosity of wanting to hear more of that sound.
Yeah. It's incredible music, and same thing. You hear it, and it's like at first it has a familiarity to it because you're hearing like folk and blues traditions from here, but then there's this whole other thing going on, and so it's super exciting. I think the first Sahel release I was aware of, and that seemed to get the most like kind of notoriety, was music from Saharan Cell Phones, which was a great compilation. Was that material that you recorded when you went over on your first trip?
Well, on my first trip over, I was doing a lot of recording on my own, but at the same time, I was noticing that while I would record, there'd be other people, like young kids with their cell phones, recording alongside me. I had this idea that there'd be some sort of, I'd be obtrusive with my field recorder standing in front of a guitarist, but it wasn't the case at all. There was like, 50 phones out at the same time recording, and me being there as a recording was just another person recording, right? And so I got really curious about what's happening to these recordings on phones. And incidentally, it was a lot of these recordings were not only being recorded on phones, but they were being shared on phones. There wasn't a lot of internet at the time, so in order to send something from one phone to another, they were doing Bluetooth transfers. But so you have to, you could walk by somebody in the street playing a song, you could hear them playing a song on their phone, and it was totally okay to stop a stranger and say, hey, can you send me that song? So as a result, you had this huge network of music being exchanged, similar to like any music network, any trading network of that would exist on the internet, but it was happening, in real time, physical songs being traded person to person. So I collected a lot of this stuff from people, from memory cards, and then I put together this compilation of some of the highlights, the stuff that stood out to me, and or just were really popular songs on this network, and then track down people, which took like a year and a half to track down the artist that I wanted on this compilation, and then we released that, and that was probably one of the strongest, best-selling releases we've had on the label. And then it got sampled a lot by Death Grips, I think, on the Money Store. There's a that album around quite a lot of cell phone samples from that record. And we released a second volume, and actually putting together a third volume of that record now, sort of revisiting some of the songs that we couldn't track down now, or it's much easier to do with the internet. So we've got artists, Ivory Coast, from Morocco, from Algeria, just all over Ethiopia. Somebody
that's
from
cool.
Ethiopia.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you were there originally, that's kind of how people were sharing local music. Were musicians there? Were any of them like producing like physical music, like CDs or tapes or anything like that, or were they just kind of sharing it in this way, recording it and kind of having a
I think
local?
physical media was sort of reaching its end point then. There
Yeah.
were still people putting out CDRs,
Right.
but it was very, it was the end of it.
Yeah.
It was the end of physical media, and musicians were really already sort of adept at like using it to their advantage. Releasing stuff. In Bamako, for example, you even had street side MP3 vendors who,
Yeah.
just a row of computers, like 20 computers, each person selling MP3s, and artists would go to those street vendors and pay the street vendors money
Hmm.
to slip their MP3 into every USB card they were filling up.
Yeah.
So, and I think at that point, artists over there were already really savvy about saying, well, we're not going to make that much money on our music,
Mhm.
but we're going to use it as a promotional platform to perform, and in performances where
Yeah.
we're gonna try to make money, and so they were sort of more ready for that shift in the music, in digital music, much before people in the West were really had a way to really make sense of it.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So you with Sahel, you initially kind of hooked up with Mississippi Records, and then I know that a few years ago you sort of moved over to secretly Canadian. Was that shift just because you were getting bigger or wanting to do kind of more professional releases and distribution and stuff like that?
It was mainly a question of distribution. I
Yeah,
mean, up until a few years ago, I was still packing records in my garage, and,
yeah, yeah.
and sending them out to stores, and it's just, it's a hard thing to
It's a lot of work. Yeah,
logistic, you know? And so yeah, we just wanted to. I mean, part of the thing we've always wanted is to just make the records available, I would encounter traveling to Europe and going to different stores and have people say, we want to hear these, we want to get these records, but we can't get them. How do we get these
yeah,
records? So I think Secretly's done a really good job of getting the records out
yeah. They're good at
all
that.
around the world, and that's really what we want. We want to be able to. I mean, it's great to be able to deal directly with customers, and Bandcamp's been great for that, but we
Mhm.
really want to support the stores. I mean, stores, because that's been such an integral part of the story of how I made this label,
Yeah,
and so yeah, and that's such it's a good place to kind of even when we design stuff now, I like to think about making a cover and how's it going to get filed in a record store. Like a
yeah,
lot of times I don't want these records to even necessarily end up in a if we do a hip hop record, you kind of want it to just end up in that hip hop section, and then
yeah.
maybe someone will be flipping through it, and what's that cover going to say when somebody picks it up? What are they going to be confused,
Right.
wondering what this is? And you want them to listen to it, and because it's always a challenge to try to not just get listeners who know African music. We want to break out of that confine and say,
Yeah.
this is just music. This is a music, and I just want to reach new ears.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I've been I opened a record store like 4 years ago, and yeah, I pretty much hands down, even if I have no idea what it is, I get whatever the new Sahel sounds are, just like bring them into the shop, and like they're all like incredible, and there's a good, like you said, there's a good like array of music diversity on there too, which is great. So um you mentioned the music for Saharan Cell Phones Volume 3 is something you're working on. What else is next for Sahel?
Yeah, we've got this really great record from this band in Niger called Mamaki Boys. It's sort of mid 2000, 2007. It was released on CDR. It's
Mm-hmm.
this kind of lo-fi, traditional, modern hip hop record.
Okay.
Doesn't sound like anything else, even in Niger. It's really, really unique sound, and that'll be coming up this summer. We've also got this record from Etran de Lair. It's they're a band from Agadez, modern guitar band, but they sort of break out of the Tuareg sound. They put a lot of sukus and sort of faster paced. They have 3 guitars going on top of each other, and it's really just high energy, modern Saharan rock. And that'll be in the fall. And then we also have this music from Saharan WhatsApp. Record that we're working on, and it's sort of a follow up to the Saharan cell phone project. But in the past 10 years, people now in West Africa have a lot of internet. They have internet on their phone.
Yeah.
They didn't years ago, and so now this chat app, WhatsApp, is the preferred mode of communication. So if I want to talk to an artist now, it's actually really easy. We can communicate with these vocal messages back and forth, and send files back and forth. I can get lyrics translated, and so it's been this huge asset in how we've been able to communicate. Well, in 2020 we did this project where every month I had a different band, and I put out an open call to artists in the Sahel, and then every month we would have a band record an EP, send it over WhatsApp, and then send some photos, would make a cover, host it on Bandcamp for a month as pay as you want, and then all the proceeds at the end of the month would go to the artist. We ran that for a year. We got 11 different artists performing, and we're going to be doing this LP of 1 track from each of the bands.
Cool.
That'll be coming this year as well.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, that's great. I was also going to ask about, there's a lot of, as you know, there's so many different labels kind of reissuing African music, or putting out new stuff. Like I'm thinking of like Awesome Tapes from Africa and Sublime Frequencies, and the list goes on and on. Now again, they're doing like the Zamrock stuff. How do you see your label kind of fitting into that landscape? Is it sort of like more the merrier, or what?
Yeah, well, I think that for one, I mean, we do some reissues, but I really want the label to be focused on supporting contemporary artists, because I think that in that sense we can develop art. I see it, we're a label, but sometimes I use the word, the Sahel Sounds project. I try to be a little more ambiguous about that, because I really want it to be almost like an institution that can support development of art and fund projects that might not get made otherwise, right? Yeah. And so, like for example, right now we're working on a music video with Etran de Lair for their new album. And so, I talked to the band. I said, well, why don't we make like a short film instead of just a music video? So we set up a WhatsApp group, and we've been using it to talk about ideas. We hired a videographer from Nigeria who shoots like Nollywood film, and I think that using it as a platform and an opportunity to get people involved and to fund art, and to create new art. That's something I'm really interested in. And then if artists can go and bring back amplifiers and travel and get guitars and get more equipment, then it can be an opportunity to really build on the local music scene, and open more doors. So I'd say that's, I can't speak to every other label, right? But I'd say that for Sahel Sounds, I really want to keep a foot in that world, and the idea of this, that it's really this collaborative project that is really alive. That's what's important for me with Sahel Sounds, that it's it's active. It's a living thing. Sure.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it gives you a chance to really try to grow and cultivate, and help musicians there, to kind of expand their reach or whatever they want to do. So I guess one of my final questions is, now that it seems like COVID's finally chilling out, which is great, do you think you'll be able to get any of these musicians over to the States, or is that, I'm sure that's still a difficult process, even not during COVID,
Well, we've got a tour we're working on with Laffy in spring of 2022.
Great.
So that's the first tour we're looking at, and we've got tours in the fall in Europe with Etron de Layer and Laffy did as well, and as things kind of get back up, hopefully we can have some more stuff happen in the U.S. next year too. So
yeah, that'd be great, because like I said, and we were talking about earlier, like hearing this music live is like really where it's at. So it's such a different experience. I heard Mdu Mokhtar, he played in Burlington like a couple years ago, and it was just like, it was amazing. So I was pretty familiar with his records and stuff, but just hearing him play guitar live, it's just like crazy, so good.
Yeah, it's hard to fit something that can be so big, such a big sound, and so different every time. I think a lot of the bands play very different shows, and it's just with Mdu, with Laffy, it's always sort of dependent on the audience, what the audience can give.
Yeah,
the artist will come back, but so every show is going to be sort of that dialogue.
Yeah. Well, that's cool, man. I think we'll wrap it up here. Thanks for chatting with me, and I'm looking forward to any of the shows and the forthcoming releases. So we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man. Take care.